I think this is like a mangled version of Hemingway's advice, which is to have intentionality to everything. That is aspirational for me, anyway. It's this idea that every piece of the writing should be there for a reason. Like that reason can just be because you thought a joke was funny, and it can be because you thought some world building detail was cool, but you don't want anything in there that is not like there for a reason, that's not intentional, that's not like vital to the piece somehow.
This is the CritRPG podcast, your one-stop shop for everything LitRPG, progression fantasy, and Royal Road. Hi, and welcome to the CritRPG podcast, the only podcast that invites people who are named after countries. With me today is Alexander Wales. I couldn't come up with a better one. I'm sorry. Really sorry. Yeah. I really hope that this podcast will be worth the candle, but we'll see. So, yeah, you've written Worth the Candle. You've written, this used to be about dungeons. You've written
Thresholder, right? One. Yeah, it's the one I'm on now. Yeah, I've written, been at this for a long time. Written a lot of long stuff, but yeah, Worth the Candle is like 1.6 million words, and this used to be about dungeons, just another million words, and Thresholder, I think it's probably going to end up about that long. It's still in progress and stuff. So
I have so many puns, but I also have like serious questions. So the puns would be: how many thresh could a thresholder hold if a thresholder could hold thresh?
Just probably 5. So yeah, I've got Millennial Scarlet is the webcomic, and then there's a webcomic adaptation of Worth the Candle coming, and a couple other novels that are like in editing and in prep work. I've got the first book of the next series is already written. So
okay, so I got to ask, how fast is your writing speed?
Right now I'm in on a hiatus. I've just been writing slow. My goal is 1 million words per year. Which I'm not going to achieve this year, but next year I'm hopeful I can get there. It kind of depends on the projects and how much I'm feeling it, and whether I run into any like bumps along the road. So I can do like 1,000 words an hour if I'm like really cooking on it, but then I can't sustain that speed. I think the most I've ever done was 16,000 words in a day, but then that's like I can't like I sit down to write and I can't really do it as much the next day. So
yeah, I
don't know. It is one of those things where I'm like, in theory I can just like put in an 8-hour day every day and write 8,000 words a day, and it absolutely does not pan out like that. As far as I think every time I have tried to schedule myself like that, I have regretted it, and so I kind of just have to take it as it comes.
I mean, like, doesn't the quality also suffer if you go that fast?
It depends. So like 16,000 words in a day. I think that they ended up being good words. Or like 10,000 is a more achievable, like a big day. But I don't think that the quality suffers that much, assuming that I had a plan going in and I have some like intentionality to the scenes, and I like knew where I was going with it. Usually if I'm out putting at that level, it's because I'm just like really raring to go on, like, I know what that chapter is going to be. I've been eager to write it. It's been sort of living in my head for a while. I think those speeds are definitely not conducive to good writing if I'm also at the same time trying to like do the plotting stuff. And I think a lot of writing just happens in the head, like when you're on a walk or you're doing dishes or stuff. You're doing the writing stuff in the head, and then when you sit down at the keyboard, you're manifesting all those thoughts. So yeah, I do think that that's not. I've definitely also had times when I'm just like, I got sick. I had COVID, and I wrote like 8,000 words in a day because I was just like I couldn't do anything else, and it was just awful. It was just like absolutely terrible because I had no plan going in. I was just like I was just doing it to do something, and I had to scrap. It was like a bonus Patreon chapter or something, and I'm just like, okay, this is not going to be anything. I was like, this is a waste of time. That's fine. So
Beach episode.
yeah, Worth the Candle does have a beach episode. But it's a very plot heavy beach episode.
I mean, I like those. I have a friend, and I always joke with him because like he wrote a very, very grim story. Actually, if you've now finished, it was called Final Boss Best Friends. And it was like really grim. Like with a title like that, you would be like, oh, that sounds awesome. But like by chapter 2, like there were like eyeballs coming, like maggots coming out of eyeballs and stuff like that level.
Yeah.
And so I was always joking that if he ever wrote like a beach episode, it would be like Omaha Beach. But like that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, Drew's already told me a bit about your writing. So he spoiled me to kind of like give me that quick shot of like Alexander Wales into my veins. So I also know that you have some very interesting ideas. Let's put it like this sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
I'm really looking forward to exploring those. But tell me about maybe your writing in order. Like, why should I read them? Why would they be awesome?
So I try to. I think there are these two instincts that I have, and one is the like deep character stuff, the like nuanced exploration of different character foibles and like backstory and like why people decide to do the things they do. And on the other hand, it's like people beating each other up with swords, you know. And it's a lot of my writing is an attempt to marry those two things. It's sort of like anime-esque, you know, big battles. I like my intricate magic systems, and I like getting really complicated and weird. I didn't used to think of myself as an ideas guy, but I think the more I talk to other writers, I think that is what I am. I think I'm like
I've read your blog. Yes.
Yeah, I'm like an ideas forward. You know, I like when you read a chapter, I like you to come across something that you maybe have not seen before. Some of that is pulled from research. It's just like being a magpie and picking up a bunch of details from like nonfiction. I'm reading. I'm in the middle of the book. It's an autobiography of the Red Baron, and I'm making notes as I go, and I'm like, okay, this is everything that is like surprising to me about, you know, being like about the mindset of, you know, World War I, being a fighter pilot or whatever, right? And I bring a lot of that stuff to my writing to give it sort of that verisimilitude, which is an important part of trying to marry those two sort of different instincts. So, yeah, a lot of the stuff that I write is trying to just be, I want the big cool set pieces, and I want, you know, I want stuff about, you know, your relationship with your father, or, you know, depression or whatever. That's not the greatest pitch, but that is what appeals to me about writing, and I mostly try to write things that I think that I would want to read.
Absolutely. And I feel as though that is the stuff that also draws people in, because like LitRPG is awesome, right? I wouldn't be doing this podcast if I weren't, but sometimes it is really shallow, right? And I really enjoy stories that try to do more with a genre than just, you know, making numbers go up, right? I like stories where the numbers going up means something because the characterization is like very, very deep, and the characterization goes beyond like, why do I want to punch this other person? I like that. Like, I really do. I mean, like I've also tried writing in that vein, obviously, because that's also something I enjoy, right? I have like been way less successful than you, but I mean, I'm getting there, right? It's not my first.
Yeah.
It's my first book, so definitely. But I meant like more, or I should rather precisely ask. Tell me about, because you were going to tell me about the plot of Worth a Candle when we started
Yeah.
on, and then we do that for like Worth a Candle and then all the other stuff that you got, so people can pick and choose.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about Worth the Candle a little bit first. So Worth the Candle is a LitRPG isekai type thing. And it follows Juniper Smith, who's like a teenage dungeon master, and he gets put in the world that is like an amalgamation of all the D&D campaigns that he's run for his friends. And the backstory, I think in the comic, that's like page 1, and then in the like print version, it's chapter 4. He had this friend who died. It's based on a friend of mine who died when I was it's the final year of high school, so I was a senior in high school. And so he is going through this world, and it's like the Act 1, Book 1 thing is that he finds some signs that his dead friend has been in this world too. And so that's like one of the overarching plot things. Worth the Candle is the way it's divided up, it's 8 books. And then he gathers this party of different people and is sort of confronting things about his past, and that's sort of my way of bringing in biographical details. Is also split into, there aren't like full chapters ever, with one exception, but there are flashbacks to, this is his old D&D group, this is how they did it there. So it's sort of it's a much more tabletop gaming approach to LitRPG than like video games, or my background for most LitRPG stuff was The Gamer, which was a Korean webcomic.
I read that actually. Yeah.
But that was like one of the originals way back in the dawn of LitRPG. But this is a much more tabletop approach to it, and so scattered throughout this like 1.5 million words is all this stuff that is different takes on like some of the tropes of tabletop gaming, and then some of the tropes of like the fantasy world building of tabletop gaming. And I think that's one of the things people like about it. There's all this recognizable stuff that's got its own twist to it, but most of the emotional journey is about sort of who I was as a teenager, and sort of dealing with stuff that, I don't know, I'm like in my 30s now and have a different perspective on it than I did when I was like 18. So
well, yeah, obviously. Unfortunately, everyone ages.
Yeah.
You when did you start writing it? Like, how old were you?
I was in my 30s. I was 2017, I think, is when the first. Yeah. So okay. I was 30 something, 33, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think I have that much different perspective now, because it's been a while since I like started writing. It was definitely something that was started on a whim, and went complementary to like the D&D campaign that I was running. So it's like one of the aside from the whole teenage trauma and personality stuff, there's a lot of maximalist world building where you like I was like, okay, Worth the Candle, we're gonna have like D&D, and a lot of the way people do world building, they do the elemental planes and stuff, and there's like the 4 elements. I'm like, okay, how many elements can I have realistically? Like, what's a good number? And I ended up with, I think it's in the 20s, right? I'm like, okay, we're gonna do like 18 elemental planes. We're gonna have demi-elemental planes. We're gonna have like 20 magic systems, and like ended up being a bunch more on top of that, and like we're putting in the whole kitchen sink, and we're going to be very serious and deliberate about that, and like what that means. It's not just going to be like a bunch of, or rather, it is going to be a bunch of stuff that's put together, but then it needs to be cohesive in the way that it does that, because these people all live in a society like together, and these things all need to interact with each other as well. So that is one of the main components of Worth the Candle, aside from the like personal journey stuff, and there's a bit of like meta narrative in it as well. I don't know, it's very long, so there's a lot of stuff in it, but the kitchen sink stuff is one of the other like main things that I was trying to bring to it, partly so that I could play off all the other like that's the conceit, is that it's all these worlds brought together, so it needs to have a bunch of stuff in it, but then having a bunch of stuff in it is also necessary for both the plotting and for sort of thematically, like because it's at least partly a novel about like creation and what it means to make things on top of that other stuff, right? So like Juniper makes all these worlds. Why does he do that? You know, like what is it about him that compels that? And then we have to have all these things in the world, and then I don't know. We're trying to merge all those things together, and it was written over the course of, I want to say 5 years. So it's very difficult to actually follow through on a vision like that. But that was the attempt. We was try and do all these things and have them work in harmony together somehow.
I mean, by all measures, I think I don't think people would like it as much if you hadn't succeeded in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
right.
Hopefully we've got more hits than misses. So
yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, like we're still gonna see where it goes when the webcomic comes out, which I'm actually really looking forward to. Because I think it's like the second or third one come out of their stables, which is really nice. And I'm really looking forward to that. And like just before the podcast started, I actually finished reading Millennial Scarlet, at least the ones that are like out there, the free ones.
Yeah,
and it's a comic about basically urban fantasy, gig economy, demon hunting, which I really liked.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that.
Millennial Scarlet. I mostly just I like the idea of gig economy demon hunting. This idea that there's a lot of my attempt of capturing what I think some of the modern ills are. Like the very first, it's very American, I think, in a lot of the stuff that is contained within it. But like the very first issue, it like takes place in a rundown big box store, right? So we have America has all these big box stores that are sort of out in the countryside, and you drive to them, and they have giant parking lots and stuff. And this is like a rundown one, and there's demon inside, and it's just like that specific sort of American decay. And there are a couple others that are in like future episodes. I don't think it's a spoiler necessarily, but we have this construction called the 5/1, which is based on some like American building codes, and so that these have started cropping up everywhere. There's like the one is like a concrete foundation, and then it's like 5 stories of like wooden construction, and they have very little soul or personality, and so we use that as like the basis for demons, you know. And so we use some of this, like some of the hallmarks of the particulars of like the American millennial existence, like the gig economy stuff, and we bring giant flashy fights with, you know, Lamb is the main character, and he's got like this katana that holds the idea of like, there's this American idea of the mall ninja, where you you go to one of these big malls and you buy like a katana and some throwing stars and stuff. And so he has a katana that's really cool because he's like bound that idea of a cool katana into the sword. So there's as far as what the core of it is, a lot of it is just sort of trying to grapple with this this world that is like maybe not ideal in a lot of ways, and that has a bunch of things that we don't really, the millennial mindset, you just like aren't responsible for any of this stuff and how it is, and you can't really change it. And there's a malaise to it, and there's also like kind of this anger. I think that's part of the millennial experience, is this sort of anger toward this world that you didn't really want, and it's like could be so much better, and you can't change it at all. But it's that expressed through, you know, using a cool katana to slice through some demons and stuff. So
it's pretty fucking rad. Yeah, I mean, like the idea of like mimetic power like tied to a katana was like really interesting. I love. I think the only thing is a big spoiler, but I love that it is powerful precisely because it's not like one thing with a story that like no one really knows, but like it encapsulates a fantasy that like thousands of kids had.
Yeah.
I really like that. It's a very fresh take to it. Have you like you from your writing, you seem like the kind of person who would like go deep into like the whole like SCP kind of thing. Did you?
Yeah, I've so qntm wrote the Antimemetic Sequence.
I didn't even say the name, and I wanted to ask it next. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's Sam Hughes is his I don't know if that's pen name or his real name, but I am a big fan of his website that has a bunch of different fiction. He wrote Fine Structure and Raw, but he's wrote the Antimemetic Sequence and has done some other SCP stuff. I'm a big fan of that. And then I'm not like deep on SCP, but I've read a lot of them. And it's one of those things where I get linked stuff a lot, and I'm like, okay, sure, I'll like, it's a bite-sized thing. I'll go for it. And then I sometimes feel like I'm just missing so much lore, you know, because it's this like shared canon. There is a lot of SCP stuff in Work the Candle and in some other stuff, like it's not SCP stuff, but it's sort of that that mode of it, especially the bureaucracy. I am a big like bureaucracy, not enjoyer, I guess, but I tend to include a lot of bureaucracy in the stuff that I write, just because I find it really interesting. There's a bit in Worth the Candle where they have so in America we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is like a big landmark thing that makes sure that there's like cutouts on every sidewalk so that you can use a wheelchair and not have to go over the curb, to like make sure that buildings are accessible, especially if they're like public buildings and stuff like that. And so in Worth the Candle they have the equivalent of that, but it's because they live in a society that has all these different species of intelligent creatures. And so like dwarves are much shorter than humans, and you need to have every seat be adjustable so it can like, right, that I love that like little minutia stuff to it. There's also a ton of bureaucracy in Millennial Scarlet, to the like one of the challenges there for me is that it's like a visual medium, and so much easier to portray the bureaucracy stuff in prose than it is like visually. How do you communicate the essentials of like government work and the ways in which these like giant systems of power that no one actually has power over. That's one of the things that's really cool about that's one of the things that's like cool about SCP to me, but it doesn't necessarily show up all that much. I think a lot of SCP stuff uses the sort of the aesthetic elements of bureaucracy without necessarily doing a deep dive on like why that stuff exists.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
it's more about the like the emotion, like the emotions or the felt implications of bureaucracy.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but very few people really write like really systematic stuff,
yeah,
right? I'm a huge systems, to borrow your like the phrasing, like enjoyer. I do the stuff like for a living. Basically, I look at like how systems work and how people move through systems and how we can design systems that actually like are like people friendly, even though no
yeah,
one ever does. But because like some of it is like you can't like you cannot build a human friendly system in the current bigger system that we have, because at some point it just kind of like you would have to admit that the big system is bad, right?
yeah,
And I mean, like, I don't want to be here like waving a red flag or anything, but it's not communism or capitalism. It's just like in general, as you said, things have gotten completely out of control, and we live in an age of self-replicating systems that work beyond our understanding in a
yeah,
very postmodern kind of way. So yeah.
yeah. And that's like at least part of I have a post that I've been really meaning to finish about what I call bureau punk, which is sort of
Mhm.
a um, these different works that are different takes on this like vast unknowable system of
Mhm.
bureaucracy, and a lot of them treat it like an elder god, right? Like
Yeah.
that's sort of and that like that's part of the horror of SCP is these
Mhm.
redactions, especially for these
Yeah.
things. And you're like, why would you redact that, right? That's part of
Oh yeah.
part of that like alien feeling that you get of this hostile system that you are just like at the edge of, which is the it's not even the like the anomalous elements or whatever. It's the it's this organization that is just existing there and redacting all this stuff and this clinical language that they use, and
Mhm.
like it's also very specific in the ways that it's clinical, and that adds to the like horror of it in a way
Yeah.
that I enjoy a lot when it's done intentionally. When it's just sort
Yes.
of like brought in unintentionally, it's still fine, but
Mhm.
I'm less about that.
I like this is exactly the kind of stuff that I love. Like there's a game called The Secret World. Um it is a terrible game, but it's an amazing story. I love this thing. It's an MMO, published by Funcom, like in the last decade. It was, to be honest, like really amazing. I love this thing. I love the story. I love everything. The entire premise is that there's that all the myths you know about the world are true. The world is hollow, and we have dug too deep. And the dark days are coming, and the Templars exist, but also the Illuminati. And you can join the Templars, Illuminati, or like the Chinese, the dragon, which is kind of like this weird myth come to life that encapsulates like every Asian crime family ever. And they thrive on chaos, and they worship a pachinko machine. It is insanely good. And that has been like kind of like my way into this, because at some point in this game you are fighting as Native Americans against the Mayans together with Vikings who wield Excalibur, and you go like, that makes sense.
Yeah,
And I was like, oh shit, this is actually mind-blowingly good. So like it's all connected. I love it.
yeah,
But yeah, go ahead. So I mean, like we've already done like half an hour and we haven't even gone through all of your stories yet. So
yeah. We can
how about this used
continue
to be
on.
Dungeons?
Yeah. So this used to be out dungeons was my palette cleanser after Worth the Candle.
A 1.6 billion word palette cleanser.
Yeah. Yeah. This used to be out dungeons. I was like, I need something light. I need something that is not going to be like emotionally draining for me to write.
Yeah.
Especially like toward the end of Worth the Candle. Part of it was burnout, I'm sure,
Mm.
because I just like pushed myself too hard, and
Mm.
part of it was just it's just like emotionally heavy beat after emotionally heavy beat
Yeah.
at the end, because
Yeah.
it's like you need to like have the climax for all these things. So this used to be out dungeons. I was like, I want something that's like almost utopian,
Mhm.
I want something that's gonna like make me that you can read on a cold day with like a cup of tea and feel better about the world or yourself. So it's about five. I guess they don't start as friends, which I got some pushback from people who like cozy fantasy because they want everyone to be like instantly friends, but they do become friends. It's just it takes more than like 2 chapters. But so it's five friends who are like going into dungeons together, and dungeons in this world are like sort of a mana release valve that have been like structured to like soak up extra magic. And you can go in them and you can like fight monsters that aren't like supposed to be too difficult, and you get some magic items out, and part of their economy of their world is built around this, but mostly, you know, people have clean drinking water, and they have adequate food, and they have strong social systems, and there's a lot of like utopian world building in as far as like having a world that is structured in such a way that maybe if you're feeling not so great about the world, you can read about this world and feel a little better. So it's a party of five diverse people. So we've got like spellcaster and our like warrior type, and the cleric is like a cleric of the god of symmetry. All the gods are a little like it's the god of infinity and the god of nothingness, and they're very like high level abstract gods. And I go into a lot of philosophy for that kind of stuff. I don't know. I had a lot of fun with it. It's not. It's about 10% dungeons by volume, and so the other 90% is like, hey, we get to like test out our magic items, or like we're gonna go on a road trip and we're gonna like go to the next town to like sell some of the stuff, or I describe a lot of meals. I had not read a bunch of cozy fantasy, and I still really haven't, but it was my attempt at doing cozy fantasy. That was the feeling that I wanted from it. And I think it mostly succeeds. I think there's a little bit more fighting, that like 10% of dungeons or whatever. I think there's a little bit more fighting than the average cozy fantasy enjoyer prefers. It's hard it's hard to say.
I think it's good. Like I really want to actually like get through it, because I don't want to like toot my own horn, but I found the parallels parallels interesting, right? Because it allows me to like kind of like chip in with my own impressions. And even though, you know, imposter syndrome always like strikes me hard whenever I talk to like anyone on this podcast, because like, you know, I have not yet sold like thousands of copies of a book. I find that maybe it's like sometimes readable for other people who also like start writing. And so I definitely feel the same way you do after I finished the first book of Torchbearer, which was like 250,000 words. And most of it was like a gigantic anger spiral, which is something I have to like edit out. Like, it's a long story, but it was like really heavy, at least towards the end, and also in my head. And then afterwards, I was like, man, I just want a story where everyone is friends. Right. And I came up with this world where it's hell, but hell's corporate. And I'm writing a band story about a bunch of monsters who want to, you know, bring metal back to hell, because metal has been banned in hell ever since Jack Black beat Satan in Metal Off. So it's silly, it's dumb, and it has a werewolf with ADHD that just like talks the entire time and uses like in every second word. It is insanely fun, and it's way easier to write.
Yes,
way easier to write.
Yeah, and I think by the end, I was done with it. I did also feel like if I had to, I could make this go on, because it is easier to write. It's the stakes stay relatively low throughout, which is in like a good way, and we've got like new magic items to introduce after every dungeon, and it's like that's always fun, and it's like not they're like has those progression fantasy elements to it, but because they are like getting stronger and developing techniques and whatever. But we're not going to the moon, right? We're not going
Punching the
way
moon
up
either.
there. It's not the end of the world or anything like that. I think like, yeah, I think I do think it gets to the maximum level that I was comfortable with as far as stakes go, which is still very, low compared to like Worth the Candle, or even like a lot of it's just about tone. So like Millennial Scarlet is pretty, I would say, relatively dark in tone. But like, even some of the fights are intense, but the tone is never too dark. For this used to be about dungeons, so no, that one did really well on Railroads, coming out on ebook and audiobook now. The second book should be any day now. I don't have a date for it, but one of the things that no one told me about writing was that there would be so much stuff to do after I had written like the things
which is
get
them
like edited and like I don't know. I kind of thought that they would just like magically get like on Amazon and stuff, and I wouldn't need to like think about them. But
this reminds me of a friend of mine. Like, you must have gone through the same phase where you were like fresh out of college, and I went to I did an exchange year in the US, and most people, when I got my bachelor's, they got their bachelor's like 2 or 3 years after that, and like Facebook got really big, and so they all started posting about like not finding a job at the same time. And I had lots of Facebook friends over there, and also, by the way, a very, very millennial thing, right? Like they were like, well, I've got a college degree, like why the truck can't I find a job now? Like everyone, like they're all gainfully employed now, more or less, but still like hard. Anyway, that topic aside, one of them wrote, so I've applied for a job now, when do I get the money? Right?
Yeah.
feels the same way about writing. Like I wrote words, like why is my check not going out? What's happening? But yeah,
there's the editing stuff, obviously, and then it's like, I don't know, there's things that need my input, and I'm like, well, I'm done with that story, I finished it. Like Worth the Candle especially, I'm like, am I not done? Can I just not like leave this story in the past? So that's been an interesting. It's been a very interesting part of the webcomic adaptations, because they send me the things to like see if I have any notes, and there's not actually an obligation for me to like do that, but I feel like I need to give my notes and stuff, right?
I've seen your notes; they're amazing.
Yeah, so I do. I don't know. Worth the Candle also has it has I think it's like a 30,000 word world building document, and then a separate 60,000 word world building document that's like just for what are called the exclusion zones. They're like little zones of where a specific type of magic has been like confined to, and they're sort of like these little sites. So there's the exclusions document, which is very long. It was supposed to be a Patreon. It was a Patreon goal thing, and I was like, well, I'll just write like a just like a one chapter thing, and it ended up getting so long, because it's like every zone and like a description of like what happened there and what it's like and what the containment procedures are and on all that stuff. But
I feel so seen. This is impossible. Please do not do this to me.
There's all the supplemental stuff that I don't know for sure if the webcomic people have read. I feel like if I were adapting it, I would not read all that extra stuff that is not germane. Maybe I would. maybe I would because I just like to go extra like that. But
Yeah.
it's like some of the notes are just like, well, in the supplemental material we have this like brief description of how walls are made. You know, how do we in the setting make a wall, and you know, it uses its own specific type of magic, and so
And that
therefore it
reflects
should
in
look like
how
this.
it looks like.
Yeah,
What it
but
looks like,
like
yeah.
yeah, Worth the Candle. I I've been off that for
Mm.
3 years,
Yeah.
something like that. And so I'm like coming back, and some of the stuff I don't remember, and I have to like go look it up.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And it's
Yeah.
sort of a trip to do that. Just really like, especially like,
Yeah.
there's like whole passages where I end up just reading it. I'm like, oh, this is actually pretty good, you know.
I love that. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that when it happens. Yeah. Yeah. And then like I hope you don't have it open in the word processor, because whenever it happens, I'm like, I should probably just like switch those two words. And like an hour later, I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do. So it was like one of those fiddly publishing things where Worth the Candle was published across like 3 platforms, and so there's just so much overhead in actually making a change that I don't feel that temptation. I'm just like, man, I am not gonna fix that. Like almost everything is fixed now anyway, but if I like I'm like, oh, this line would maybe like I could tweak that line, and then I'm like, no, I would have to like go to like 3 different websites and track it down and like do the edit. That's too much. That's too much.
So what I do is I tell myself I'll just edit it now, and when I do the edit, like the dev edit later, I'll do it like better. But the issue is like the dev edit will like probably kick it out anyway, because it doesn't like the plot doesn't fit. So my question here is like, do you do dev edits, or do you just like, and if so, like to what extent? Because it's kind of hard for web serials.
It is very hard. There was a dev. I didn't do it for Worth the Candle because the plan for that was always just like get an ebook and just don't throw more work into this thing that is like already pretty draining. Thresholder got a dev edit, which is not public yet. It's going to be, so Thresholder book 1 is going to come out in February next year, I think, is the plan. But so I did a dev edit, added like 30,000 words to it, because there's like some structural stuff that got changed in the dev edit, and so I added like quite a bit of extra material. It's like 6 extra chapters of stuff, and I think it improves.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
I think it improves the work a lot, but I'm also like, how much is this improving the work, you know?
Tell me about Thresholder real quick.
Thresholder is have you ever heard of Jump Chain?
No, but I've heard about sliders.
Yes, it's like sliders.
Good.
So a Jump Chain is this like very exclusively internet thing where people have what are called jump documents that like just random strangers make for individual worlds, and they're like, it's like usually a list of options. Like you're going to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and like, what are you going to pick for your powers? And then people will like pick their selections or whatever, and then they'll go to the next jump document. And it's sort of, I don't really get it that much. I had my own idea for what a jump chain was, and I wrote Thresholder based on that idea. But I did the research. And then I was like, well, this is not really, I don't really understand this. I don't get the appeal of it. But Sliders was a foundational show for me. It was sci-fi. It was on TV at the time that I was pretty young, and it was like, we didn't have cable, and
we didn't have YouTube.
Yeah, we didn't have YouTube. We had movies, and you would watch them on
or
TV,
you would shut up.
And you'd get a VHS or maybe a DVD later on from the like video rental store.
Which is like
but
analog Netflix, guys.
yeah. So Sliders was on TV, and it was like one of the few sci-fi shows. It was that, and like, you know, we had Star Trek. There were a couple different ones, but there's like Fox Network TV, and the premise is that they are just going from world to world trying to get home. And Thresholder is that same premise of going world to world, except it's much more high concept in terms of the worlds that they go to. And a Sliders episode was always like 40 minutes or whatever, and they always, with only a few exceptions, I think, they would move on at the end of that 40 minutes. And it was like, you know, this is a world where instead of having sports, they have like intellectual competitions, and then they do whatever they need to do there. They would explore that concept, and then they would leave. Or it'd be like, oh, here's a world where a virus killed all the men, or killed like 99% of the men, and like the women are in charge, and it's like men are second-class citizens or whatever. And then they explore that, and then they go, and sometimes it's an apocalypse, and sometimes it's like inexplicably the 1920s or whatever. So yeah, Thresholder, I was like, yeah, let's just like go. We'll do one book per world, which I've kept to, and then we'll just do our adventure, and then we'll move on to the next world, and we'll accrue powers. We'll do like a progression fantasy thing. We accrue powers, and then one of the things is there's always another Thresholder in each world, and it's always someone else who's like an opponent who's like also going through the worlds and getting their own powers. So
you really wanted to mix Sliders and Highlander?
Yes, I wanted to mix Sliders and Highlander. I wanted to have a bunch of like intersecting genres and stuff. I thought that would be like
fascinating.
The idea that I had in my head, like most of the reason I ended up pursuing Thresholder, as opposed to like a dozen other ideas, right, is the idea of like walking around in power armor with like holding Excalibur, right?
Yeah.
And just having this mishmash of things, and just taking it very seriously, like not being like wacky about it, or like only like having it be wacky but in a grounded way, I guess.
Yeah.
Where like occasionally a character is like, yep, just going through space with my like steampunk helmet and my power armor, and I'm just, you know, I guess this is my life now. I would never actually write that. This is my life now, but it's that beat. It's that narrative beat.
I think that is a perfectly fine way, just like fine line to say when you're going through space with a steampunk helmet.
Yeah. So book one of Thresholder is like urban fantasy. It's werewolves and vampires in sort of like it's technically fantasy Boston, but like
because you know why? Because that is the first thing that I ever wrote that never came out. That is like a story that I wrote. Is like young vampire hunts her sire through like a series of worlds.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I wrote. Never got published anywhere because it was horrible. But like it is insane how much I see in some of your stories there. Yeah. But sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Technically, the first world he goes to is like an alternate Earth, and he picks up a power armor there, but that's in sort of like in the backstory of Thresholder. Except with the dev edit, it's like it's more of the main story now, the first and second world. So it goes to a fantasy world. Then third world, which is the bulk of book one, is like this urban fantasy thing, and then the book after that is like an Eastern martial arts sort of, you know, key system, and we're doing like training on a mountaintop and have fighting between all these sects and stuff. And then like so each book we shift genres, we leave a bunch of stuff behind. There is continuity, like we're always following Perry. He's a geography grad student who was like just sort of doing more school for the sake of doing more school because he didn't really know.
That's a huge black cat.
He is enormous. Yes. Smoky. But yeah, Perry like was doing more school for the sake of doing more school because he didn't really know what he was doing with my life, feeling kind of purposeless. A portal appears to him one day, and he's like the thought occurs to him to like go get someone or go get the police, and then he's like, well, what if the portal disappears? And then I'm just like a guy who saw a portal once and like didn't go through it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you have to go through a magical portal because like what else are you doing
to.
with your life, right? You
Yeah.
you gotta go
Or
through
grad school, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, he leaves all his debts behind and goes through a portal. I think Perry, I like Perry as a character. He is, I think, somewhat difficult to grapple with because he is very mercurial in terms of like how he relates to other people, and like he goes like he every different place that he goes to, he tries to like slot himself into it, right? And then a lot of the like enemy thresholders he fights are doing their own different thing, and they have their own, you know, they're either trying to accrue their own power, or they're trying to do like an uplift thing, or they have their own ideas about what it means and like what it means to like fight other people all the time and stuff. So yeah, it's probably it's going to be 5 books long, and I'm at the tail end of book 4 right now, which is just taking some time to write. So
cool.
In theory, it's gonna be a million words when it finishes. It actually might be more than a million words right now, and I just have 1 book in addition to that. I haven't checked the word count in a while, but for publication, the idea was like 200,000 words per book, and I feel like I'm blowing past that without a care in the world. So
I mean,
but
like,
yeah,
who cares?
Thresholder is ongoing, and then ebook is going to be, I think, February, but I don't have a date for that either. So
yeah, but it's going to be nice. Like, I feel like we have to like rush through the rest of the podcast in like the next 6 minutes, but no, we're gonna keep talking for a bit longer. No, because like I think those like ideas, just by on the face of it, are like fascinating. I really love this stuff, and it reminded me a little bit. Have you ever read anything by Silver Linings? Daily Grind.
Oh yeah. I read the Daily Grind. I was quite active on the Discord for a while, and then I have this. So I'm not very suited to reading web fiction because I like to binge. I like to just like tear into something and have that consume me, and then you hit that like in progress mark, and you're like, well. So I can do it if there's like a strong community. That helps me a lot because I can have like people to talk to in the like interim while I'm waiting for a new chapter drop or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that that I read and I get to the in progress point and I'm like, well, see you in like a year or 2, or you know, so I can binge again. But yeah, I was Daily Grind. I was pretty active on their Discord ages ago when it was
newish.
I think still in book 1 maybe, but there was a lot of really interesting ideas in that. That was the thing that I really valued about the Daily Grind. I thought that was
because it was either him, either them or their partner, or they mentioned on their podcast. I'm not quite sure who it was, but they also wrote a story about people hopping different worlds, and they all always end up in this completely empty world where all these like multiverse people used to live, but now it's completely empty. And I thought that was also like super fascinating. I have to like look up the name, but there's like so much good stuff I want to read, and I just don't have the time.
Yeah. I think for me, it's like I have. I guess I don't actually have the time, but it's much more an issue of like getting into the investment of it. Yeah. It's always that initial hump, because usually I will read even bad things if I can get like 10 chapters in, right?
I do that every time.
And I'm like, well, I just gotta finish it, you know? Like, how long could it be? And
no, totally. Like for me, I mean, I have basically 4 jobs. So I'm doing the podcast, I'm doing the agent stuff, I'm doing I have a real job, a quote unquote real job, where I earn like most of my income, and then I'm an author. So when am I supposed to read? Sometimes, some days, I just, it's like 9 o'clock, and I'm like, oh, I'm done, huh? So and then I try to read like something on the couch, but I'm like actually falling asleep while reading it, and it feels disrespectful to the author somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I just kind of like sit there and like watch one YouTube video that goes for 45 minutes, and then I like fall asleep.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long I can keep doing that. But
yeah.
So,
when I was in college, I had one semester where I was working 60 hours a week between and going to school full time. And I was just like, wow, I could not do this for like this is just not something that I can do continuously. But as far as like reading goes, for me, reading time competes with writing time. It's like I'd usually rather be writing. And then, I used to do a lot of tabletop gaming, and it's like the more I started writing, the more it felt like it was these competing things as far as like my creative energy and my
it's a muscle.
Yeah. And so I'm like, well, I kind of have to. I stepped down as DM, and so I was like a player, and then that's a lot less work. But then I still like find myself using my creative energy for that, and so.
So here is how I know that I am an asshole. I love tabletop RPGs. I can't play them because whenever I play them, I have a very set idea in mind what's going to happen, and then if it doesn't, I get upset about it, and I don't want to be that person, so I can't play tabletop RPGs. Some systems are easier to play than others like that, like for example Forge in the Dark games, so Blade in the Dark, Torch Against the Dark, that sort of stuff. Really easy to DM because you can literally just let go and let people like go ham because they do most of the world building, and you're just there as a wall for them to bounce ideas off of. But like I've tried playing the German equivalent of like D&D or even D&D, and I just can't. Like it doesn't work for me. Like either I railroad people super hard or I just get bored. So sorry, that was like a quick aside.
There's a lot of that stuff in Worth the Candle. The stuff about railroading and these competing ideas of like in theory it's a collaborative thing, right? Which is actually like the interesting part. I was DM'd before I was a writer, right? That was my I did quite a bit of writing in like high school and stuff, but I was mostly doing dungeon mastering and like writing out those stories and stuff. And it is interesting to go from the very, very collaborative sort of improv based stuff to like structured writing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I cut my teeth on online role playing.
Yep.
And dialogue, perfect. Like perfect training wheels for that. And setting and stuff like that, and just like general idea generation, amazing. And then you get to the point where you actually have to plot when you write a real book, and you are done. You are donezo. I would love to talk to you about that in the bonus stuff, but maybe we can also like segue that in a little bit here. So which brings to the second question of this 1 hour podcast. Which is actually I forgot. No, I'm kidding. Maybe let's do this one first. So what's the best advice you've ever gotten as a writer?
I try to follow. I think this is like a mangled version of Hemingway's advice, which is to have intentionality to everything. And that is aspirational for me anyway. I think there are some people who are like, I gotta like edit this, I gotta write this so that every piece of it has purpose, and ideally multiple purposes. With web fiction, especially with the lack of editing, you're trying to get a chapter out. That is very much not always possible, but it's this idea that every piece of the writing should be there for a reason, and like that reason can just be because you thought a joke was funny, and it can be because you thought some world building detail was cool, but you don't want anything in there that is not like there for a reason, that's not intentional, that's not like vital to the piece somehow, even if that vitality is just in having a moment of downtime, right? It's like good to have downtime. It's not like you want to be all killer, no filler, right? But part of that is having
the emotional beats.
Yeah,
because you can't, like, I tried that. I literally tried that, and it didn't work in the first version of my thing that I published. If it's just one thing after the other, like there's a writer that I really like called Matt Bird. He just gives amazing writing advice, and he literally calls it one darn thing after the other.
Yeah.
If you never have like a point where people can settle down and actually think about what happened, like some people call it a sequel, right? It's really hard for the writer and for the reader.
Yeah. And the other thing Hemingway said was he had this iceberg theory, which is that you show like 10% of the story and you let the reader figure out the other 90%. I think that's way too small an amount, but it is usually more effective to have the reader be filling in the blanks on their own and making the connections, because then they're an active participant.
I mean, Hemingway was also like really, really deep into the whole like minimalist like sentence structure stuff, right? Which is I guess like it's amazing to read, but my God, does this guy, like, he probably spent like years filing on one sentence or whatever, because he wrote, like, his books aren't that long, and he spent like 3 years writing on one. Like, obviously, you know, he had the keyboard, but still, like, that's
and I you know, I'm writing these huge sprawling things, and so I think it is. I do think there's a little irony in me saying like, oh yeah, Hemingway, that's my guy. But
hey, if you write 1.6 million words like Hemingway, I think you could make some serious dough.
Yeah. So I'm not going to hold myself to that standard, but that's the aspiration. That's I think it's good. I'm going to name check some others, like authors I've found helpful. Dan Harmon does Story Circle. He has a really great guide on, it's like the Channel 101 website. Kurt Vonnegut, I was a huge fan of growing up. He does a lot of good writing breakdown and advice, and I don't think he really follows the stuff that he says. And then Chuck Palahniuk has a really great essay on eliminating saying what people are thinking. You want to communicate it through like through their actions and like the sort of tertiary details. I think that makes for much stronger writing. It also is one of those things you can go overboard on, but
writer beware. That's a very hard balance to find, because my first draft, I did that a lot, and people were like, "What the hell is happening? Why is anyone acting like that?" On the second draft, I way over explained, and hopefully at some point I will get it right.
Can a team of has-been teen idols save the world? Find out in the new series Boy Bands and Dragons. When Neverboyland is sucked into a magical world, their reunion takes a back seat to staying alive. But if they can get over the past drama that drove them apart, they may find that even pop stars can be heroes. Come and discover your new favorite read. Our comeback tour is Slaying Monsters, the first in the Boy Bands and Dragons series by Kim Smuga Otto, dropping on Kindle Unlimited, October 25th.
Speaking of that kind of stuff, what is one thing that, if you could go back and change, you would, or that you've learned recently or sometime in the past that struck you and that you've done differently from there on?
So I think the biggest one is to recognize when one story is actually two stories. I had a novel I was working on. It was like it's called The Emperor's Soul, and then Brandon Sanderson came out with a novella called The Emperor's Soul, and or something like that. And I'm just like, oh, okay.
Do you also have like shut up? You also don't have like a fake imaginary rivalry with Brandon Sanderson, do you?
No,
because that's my thing. Like, I was like, you know what would be cool? Fantasy, but people have power armor. There's like power with like gems, and Brandon was like, there you go.
Yeah. This one was just the title, and then I was like, it was also I think cribbing a little bit from Takeshi Kovacs.
Oh, Altered Carbon.
Yeah, I think I was cribbing a little bit from that because this was a while ago, but I ran into this problem on Thresholder, so I've been thinking about it a lot. I think it's understanding when you are writing a story when the different elements are like sort of diverging, and book 4 of Thresholder, that there have been these 2 plot lines, and I thought they were both great. And then I'm looking at them, and the more I look at them, I'm like, oh, these should have been 2 books, right?
Yeah,
we could have done this plot line in this book, and then just done a separate plot line in the next book. But the first time I came across that problem that like actually sunk a project, it was The Emperor's Soul. It had like really nothing to do with the Sanderson novella of the same name, but I was like, well, that was my title, but it should have been two books, right? It was like a detective story about this detective who gets like pulled forward in time, and he was like a Sherlock Holmes figure because there were a bunch of books written about him, and so he comes back to life through this like magic system or whatever after like 100 years, and people think that he's going to be like Sherlock Holmes, and he's just like a regular detective. And then also the world has changed around him, and then also there's this stuff. I was like, okay, this is too many things, and they're not working in harmony together. I think that is really, really tough if you are trying to do that in the edit, right? To disentangle these things or to try to bend them together. So that's like,
tell me about that. Yeah,
you gotta really sit down and in the planning stages make sure that you are not actually writing 2 novels that have been unhappily married. So
yeah. Or if you are in the unfortunate event of actually finding out that you have done that, torch the entire thing and start from scratch. Like that's my personal advice there. Like,
yeah,
if you really want to write that story, then start from scratch. Do not try to kind of like cut this thing apart and put it back together like some sort of like Frankensteinian amalgamation. It will suck. It will take forever, and it won't be good at the end.
Yeah. So I'm kind of like there for Threshold Book 4, and I don't think that it's at that level of badness that but I do definitely I'm like, oh, this would have worked a lot better if I had just been very focused on each of these separate plot threads.
Yeah.
And I could have made like 2 shorter books that just did these sequentially. They didn't need to be together. It's very tricky, I think, to figure that out at the planning stage too, because sometimes they can seem fine until you get to writing, and sometimes it's like you make the plans and then the little details in the writing sort of shift things. It's like if you're building a box, and like the individual tolerances add up to a very big gap in one side of it. So I don't know. It is one thing that I would do differently for this specific book of Thresholder, but it's one thing that I wish had been a lesson that was more easily learned. Yeah,
definitely. So one thing in that vein, right? When I've always liked being a pantser. I like, I'm German, of course I like being a pantser. But I loved just writing from seat of my pants. Like I wrote the magic system, I wrote like everything from seat of my pants. It was amazing because I could discover everything. It was great.
Yeah.
But didn't make for a good story, because at the end of the very first draft, I just had like one endless anger spiral because I didn't know where I wanted to go. So I defaulted to the same emotion over and over again. And you earlier said that like everything should have a purpose, and I totally agree. And I would add the programming wisdom: dry. Do not repeat yourself.
Yeah.
There was recently someone on the podcast, I think it was C Mantis, who said like, hey, like, don't do something twice. And that is super true. But then when you have this story that has all these things that kind of like repeat and repeat and repeat, you come to a point where you realize like, hey, I should just plot this. I should plot the entire thing. And so I've learned 2 things there. maybe to kind of complement your learning. And that is, it is a good idea if you have pantsed to, at the end, when you've actually done all the stuff, go through it again, read it with the intent of actually finding out what is happening in this chapter, like what are the different narrative strands, what's going on here, putting them all on sticky notes. You can do it on Miro, you can do it in physical, like whatever. And then after that, putting whichever story grid you fancy over it and see what stands out. And I've done that today because I really felt like I want to fix this. I want to do something with it. So I spent the entire morning doing it. And I was like, these 17 chapters can just go die in a fire. Like they have no place here, right? And like, yeah, they're cool to write.
Though. That's always, I hate doing that.
Yes, but in the end, it's going to make for a better story because like I will have to find some way, shape, or form to like have the power-ups or the level gains somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I've put this grid on it and I'm like completely chunking the beginning and like doing something else with it, I now can see not just a good story, but a great one, right? And I think this long TED Talk is basically coming to a point where if you're pantsing, that is perfectly fine as long as you edit afterwards. There are some people who can write a perfectly adequate or even a great story by pantsing. I'm not one of them. I had Travis Baldry on the podcast once, and he's a very intense person. I love him a lot, but he's a very, very intense person. And I said, hey, don't you ever like want to like pants? He's like, no. I wanted to pants. It was amazing, but I couldn't get it done, so I became a plotter instead. I'm like, okay, that man has a singular purpose.
Yeah.
So he taught me that it's okay to kind of just plot if you can't.
Yeah.
Pants. Yeah, thanks for listening to my TED Talk. So number 4. What's one book that you love and why is it awesome?
Oh man. Okay. So I thought a lot about this.
Thanks.
I have to go with The Magicians by Lev Grossman. It's like my favorite fantasy book. So it's part of a trilogy, and I think, but when I first read The Magicians, it was not. It was just one book, and it wasn't intended to be part of a trilogy. It was just like one and done.
But then he pulled 2 more out of his hat.
Yeah. But like he actually, so he wrote one more after that because he was like, he had some new thoughts on it, and then he wrote the third, and it was crazy how well it fits as a trilogy, given that it was not planned as one. And like,
what is it about?
It is about Quentin, who like goes to, he's like a kid who's been obsessed with like fantasy and like finding his place in the world through fantasy, and then he lives kind of like a boring, depressing life, and then he gets accepted to Breakbills, which is magic college, like Hogwarts, except I think the touchstone is much more Chronicles of Narnia is like one of the main reference points, but it's kind of both. It's kind of like this meditation on on this fantasy of, you know, that a lot of people have as a child of like going into this magical world, right? That is different from your normal world. It's like, it's not the mundane, it's the magical, and you're actually special, and you know, you're gonna have these grand adventures and stuff like that. And
Harry Potter is an isekai.
It is, yes. I've actually always said this because he goes to like, yeah, technically it's still in the same world, but it like they actually like don't intersect really that much.
And there's a portal, platform 9.75.
Yeah.
Right.
So he goes to the like magical world, and then, you know, he gets told that he's special and stuff. But so in The Magicians, it is the first book. Quentin as a main character is very whiny, but he's whiny in a way that I was as a teenager. He's like disaffected in the way that I was as a teenager. I related a lot to Quentin because I read the books. I was a software engineer for like 7 years or something like that. It was what I went to college for. And I was reading this book like a couple years into that, and I was like, it just really resonated with me and helped me like understand my own stuff a little bit better. But because for Quentin, going to Magic College, going to break bills does not actually fix everything for him. Like, it is revealed as this fantasy that like somehow everything that is like not, that does not feel right for him, that like the depression and like ennui and whatever, is not actually going to get fixed by going to Magic College either. You know, is so it's in some ways a deconstruction of that. And then the first book just like that is the first book, and a lot of people do not like it. It's very literary. It also does magic really well. I just like a couple weeks ago finished Lev Grossman's most recent book, which was The Bright Sword, which I do also recommend, but it didn't like grip me in the same way that The Magicians did. But Lev Grossman does a really good job of making magic feel magical, which I think is a very difficult thing to do. It's not like hard magic systems, but it you read these descriptions of the magic happening and you're like, yeah, that is like so like cool. It's like very affecting for me, the way in which it's written. So I hesitate to recommend this because I think the main character really turns people off. But it's like it resonated with me like my teenage self, and I'm like, yeah, this is like who I was, right? So to me, I'm like, yes, this is great, but that is the main sticking point, is the character of Quentin and his sort of cynicism and stuff that like just does not go away at all when he like he goes to Magic College and he's still like the same person. So they also made a TV show of it, which is very different, but I also enjoyed.
Wasn't there also like that? Like there was like that, and there was another one that I wanted to watch, where it was about like Salem. But I think I still have to like get into that. Like urban-esque fantasy is like really my thing. I really like that. Yeah. I wish Royal Road would like it, but I'm not going to write another. Yeah. I'm not going to write Royal Road on hard mode ever again. Like, no, I'm saying that, but I should redact it. I will write Royal Road on hard mode again, but only after proving I can beat it on easy. So we'll see. Yeah. Sounds good. So last but not least, shoutouts.
I think I'm going to shout out Daily Grind. I really liked the it has a sense of whimsy that I really value, and a sense of just like being a little bit weird, especially in sort of some of the LitRPG system stuff that I really like that a lot. Shout out to Player Manager. I don't know if you've read that. I really enjoy.
I've had Ted Steele on the podcast.
Yeah,
it is insane. This book is like it's a work of art, and like no one reads it because it's this weird convergence. Like it's insane. Yeah.
I enjoyed Player Manager a lot. I'm not up to date. I have that web serial problem of not being up to date.
He keeps writing it. It's fun.
Other than that, shout out to the Red Baron, whose autobiography I'm reading.
Red Baron. Yeah. I'm quite sure that he's gonna be like thumbs up.
Yeah, it's been dead for 100 years, but he gets it.
He gets it. Yes. I don't know. Like there's probably a joke here, but I don't know if I can find it. Okay, but with that being said, this has been like a very, very interesting episode, and I feel as though we've crammed like many questions into the later half of it. But I do still think that it was a wonderful discussion, and it gave people a lot of like insight into your stuff. And if you're still listening, why don't you go out there and proclaim the greatness of Alexander Wales like anywhere you can, because the webcomic is coming out soon and it's going to be amazing. And I would love it if people actually talked about it more.
Yeah, I think Worth the Candles, I'm hoping that will find its second life, right? Because it had its time being a web serial, and it's in ebooks now. Book 4 should be coming hopefully soon, and then the webcomic, and I'm like, yeah, there's so much, to it and stuff. But yeah, so if you want to read my stuff and you want something short, I would suggest there are a couple shorts for Worth the Candle. There's a Christmas special, which is not canon there, and then there are like a couple side stories for it if you want to not just immediately start on a like 1.6 million word story.
And if you want, it's all up on. Is it on KU? No, it's not, right?
The first 3 are on KU, and then the rest is on Royal Road right now.
Yes, awesome. Okay, and then like of course there's also the audiobooks. And yeah, cool. Alex, stay on. We'll keep talking about some other stuff. I want to ask you about basically starting a media race, because that's something I've also been struggling with. A little bit of world building in there too, and just in general have like a bit of a chat. But that will be in the bonus material because I need to pay my editor. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. And if you've enjoyed the show, come on, check out the Patreon. I think maybe at some point I'll also give away some free codes. People can just like jump in, maybe like 5 per episode or whatever. That could be fun. But yeah, thank you again for everyone, and I'll see you next time. Cool. And if you're on Patreon, the show goes on.